In a few moments, hello everyone. We're very excited to be with you today. We'll leave a moment or two for people to officially join the webinar. I see the participant number shooting up right now. So thank you so much for joining us today. We will be starting very, very soon, within the next minute or so. And of course, this webinar today is a product of the Gateway International Group, where, as we say, your gateway to next generation international education. To make sure you're in the correct place, again, today is April 7th, and today's webinar is titled Evaluating Sustainability of International Academic Partnerships. We have a great panel for you today. But we're going to take a few moments to just learn a little bit more about Gateway and the participating organizations and sponsors that make this webinar possible. To make sure you're in the same place, you're in the correct place. This is a product of the Gateway Leadership Institute. This is our 6th cohort of the Institute, and we are focused specifically on international partnerships during this program. We have about between a dozen to 20 participants who register for the Leadership Institute. We not only have the public-facing webinars, which you're participating in today, but there's also a private workshop that happens behind the scenes. We also work together to develop a new resource that all the participants are an author or contributor to, that becomes publicly and freely available to the broader field of international education. Our facilitators, of course, are myself and Rosa, and we'll do a brief introduction in a few moments. If you don't know so much about Gateway, we certainly encourage you to visit the Gateway International Group website. You can join the Gateway newsletter called Gateway Edge. This is a great way to learn about all the different services that the Gateway International Group offers to the field, including their solutions. There's learning abroad. We have a variety of resources and increasingly different pillars or segments to the broader offerings or portfolio of Gateway International are now available. So please visit the website to learn more. I'm thrilled to be with you today. Again, my name is Dr. George Kacenga. I'm one of the co-facilitators. In my day job, I'm the Vice President for Enrollment Management at William Patterson University of New Jersey. And I'll let my colleague do a brief introduction of herself.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Rosa Almoguera, and I'm located in Spain, specifically in Toledo, Spain. And I'm very glad to have this occasion of being with our panelists today and with all of you. So thank you for joining us.
And I see some of you doing it already, but please use the chat feature to share where you are from, where you're located. That's a great way to build the network and understand the diversity of who is on the panel today. But also, as a point of housekeeping, we will go through the panelist presentations. Then we will have a period for Q&A dedicated at the end. But use the Q&A feature of Zoom to ask your questions. That lets us prepare answers for you at any time. So use the Q&A feature, and then we'll reserve the official responses to the Q&A section at the end of today's presentation. Now, Rosa, I think, would you be willing to introduce our great participating organizations and sponsors?
Yes, sure. So the Gateway Leadership Institute is made possible thanks to our participating organizations, which for the cohort 6 are Boston Education Group, QS, and Prodigy Finance. And we are very, very grateful to our participating organizations for making this available to this cohort. We also have sponsoring organizations, which for the Gateway, for this edition of the Institute, are AECC, Study Abroad Consultants, Shorelight, Forstay, IDP Connect, and Verify Ed. As you can see there, all GLI finishers participants will receive a digital certificate of completing from Verify Ed. So thank you to all our sponsoring organizations.
Excellent. Thank you, Rosa. And of course, we have particular thanks to our panelists who are joining us today. So first, we have Dr. Susan Buck Sutton. She's an Associate Vice President of International Affairs Emerita in Indiana University. We'll then be hearing from Nancy Ruther, Dr. Nancy. She's the principal and founder of Gazelle International. And then we'll hear from Hakim, who's the co-founder and co-CEO of Verify Ed, again, one of our sponsors for a really enduring sponsor for many of the Gateway Leadership Institutes. We've really appreciated all his great work. But these are experts in the field, both from an academic perspective, professional organization, and even from the industry perspective, to speak to us today about international partnerships. So we want to get right to their content. As they are presenting, again, please feel free to use the Q&A feature. I'll be monitoring the chat, but it is easier for all of us if you ask questions in the Q&A so that we can capture them and then have a good, robust discussion at the end of today's webinar. Okay, so first I want to introduce Dr. Susan Buck Sutton, and we're really excited for the content you're going to be sharing with us today. May I pass the baton?
Indeed, and let me share my screen. I'll be right there, and I'll make this, I hope, full screen. Okay. I'm always delighted when anyone asks me to talk about international partnerships, because now that I have retired from my institutional life, but I am affiliated with the American Council on Education and the Institute of International Education at this point. But what I do is spread the gospel of international partnerships as far as I can spread it, because I believe that we are living in an increasingly interconnected world of higher education. And I can prove that point by presenting, beginning with some statistics from that are collected every 5 years by the International Association of Universities, which is an international higher ed association based in Paris, and has membership of institutions from around the world. And every 5 years, IAU does a survey of its members concerning internationalization at those particular institutions. And the most recent survey, which came out in 2019, they're in the midst of collecting data for the next one right now. But the last one that came out in 2019, one of the questions that was asked was, what are the top 3 most important benefits of internationalization for your institution, for your university? And then the answers were aggregated by region of the world, as you see here in the columns, with the sort of the light green being the top reason, the bluish color being the second most important reason, and the tan being the third most important reason. And those with the reasons without any numbers were not chosen for the top 3. What jumped out at me when I saw this was, what's number 1 for every region of the world, except North America, where it's still number 2, enhanced international cooperation and capacity building. That is to say that what is at the heart of international partnerships, international cooperation and capacity building. Number 1 across the world, except for North America, North America being Canada and the United States in this case, our number 1 is student learning, that has increased global awareness of our students, which pretty much corresponds to what is a similar survey by the American Council on Education gets those same results. What is so fascinating about the idea that across the world, enhanced international cooperation has risen to the top is that as recently as 2005, it didn't appear anywhere on this list except for Africa. So this is new for every region of the world except Africa to have such attention paid to partnerships. The US is no exception. We are not exceptional in this regard, and probably not in many others as well, but that's a whole other discussion. In any event, our partnership growth in the US has been quite recent. It did start 100 years ago, more or less. 1923 is the moment that the University of Delaware and the Sorbonne started the very first, what became known as Junior Year Abroad program for the US. That is, those two universities agreed that a cohort of students from Delaware, and actually they allowed others to come along, so they pretty soon they were coming from the Ivy League and the Seven Sisters on the Delaware program. But the students from Delaware would come to France for a year. They'd actually come the summer before and live with the host family to get their French up to par, and then they'd spend the next year perfecting their French language skills at the Sorbonne. That's how it started, but it didn't spread very quickly. By 1984, when the American Council on Education did a survey, they found that most US higher education institutions had no international partnerships. 2012, by that time, American Council on Education was doing its CERT mapping internationalization survey every 5 years. 31% of US institutions still had no partnerships. 21% were starting them for the first time. This is just 10 years ago. And 48% had some partnerships, but they were intensifying partnership work. The 2021 or 22, the data is from 2021, it was published in 2022, ACE mapping survey, 28% of US institutions still have no partnerships, but 7% more are starting them. So we're in a growth phase on this like everybody else. Now, despite being this growth phase and partnerships being on the rise, it's still true that unfortunately, too many international partnerships end up in one of these three categories. That is, once a piece of paper, an MOU, is signed, this is what happens. Paper only, something was signed, but there has never been activity. A friend of mine at Colorado State University calls these ceremonial MOUs, dormant, asleep. They once had activity, but no longer. Or this is not mutually exclusive here, lopsided. That is, one partner is getting a lot more out of it than the other, or one partner is calling the shots, making the decisions more than the other. So good intentions and the desire to have partnerships are not enough. This we have learned. So why do most partnerships actually not go very far? Or why has that been the case up to now? Hopefully we can change that. This is fundamental, I think, for these reasons. All of this, as I have just said, is fundamentally new territory for higher education. Second, partnerships have long been viewed as a minor tactic of internationalization. If you look at international offices, they're heavy on the student mobility in and out, with some faculty mobility for certain kinds of institutions and research for certain kinds. Partnerships have not been focused on, they've been viewed as sort of a tactic, but not something of value in and of themselves. We've had, therefore, little understanding of the full potential and impact that partnerships can have, little understanding of how to plan, initiate, manage, harness them. Often partnerships have been left to individual initiatives of a faculty member over here, a dean over there, the occasional research or development project, particularly for the land grant institutions in the United States, or the study abroad office. And I also think a lot of partnerships don't go very far because of the continuing residue of colonialism and systemic inequalities and assumptions of current global relations. So there's a lot that has led to this negative situation. But to overcome this, as a result, what we're now finding is that many US higher education institutions are becoming strategic or more strategic about developing either individual partnerships or their overall partnership portfolio. That is the whole set of all the partnerships they have. So either individual ones that have the bullet points that follow, or the whole portfolio added together has the bullet points that follow. But to be becoming strategic about partnerships mean focusing on developing partnerships that advance the institution, its mission, its plans, its particular student body, its particular strengths, that really have focused in on institutional strategies, that partnerships that use resources effectively and do not spread them too thinly. which means you don't have so many partnerships that you can't honor your commitments to all of them. You have spread yourself too thinly. Partnerships that provide framework and guidance, or becoming strategic, means also that the institutions provide framework and guidance for those engaged in partnerships. The partnerships enable the institution to make good on its, or the situation enables the institution to make good on its promises. The partnerships have deep impact, either individually or collectively as a carefully constructed set. The partnerships engage a range of faculty, staff, and students, not just a few, but a broad range. They can be sustained over time. The institution is able to ensure safety for those participating in partnerships and compliance with regulatory issues, as well as ethics, etc. The partnerships and the institution is able to get everyone on the same page about partnerships, more focused, less haphazard approach, thereby unlocking the full potential of partnerships. So in this process of becoming more strategic and maybe culling the partnerships to have fewer but more successful partnerships, we are also learning through the research that has been done recently on partnerships what makes some more successful than others. And part of this is recognizing that partnership development is never simply signing a piece of paper. It is always an evolving, collaborative, creative, iterative process. It keeps going and it keeps changing. Successful partnerships explicitly ask participants to reflect, to brainstorm, and to modify them over time. Successful partnerships conduct regular monitoring, assessment, evaluation, and close if there's no longer a need for the partnership, but go forward if there is. Successful partnerships encourage new and different faculty, staff, students to become involved, spreading across and transforming each partner institution. They are embedded in overall partnership and broader institutional strategies and mission. That is, they dovetail, they support the institutional strategies and mission. The institutions provide these successful partnerships with financial, logistical, and expert support. The partnerships themselves engage in frequent communication, sustained relationship building. That is as important as any particular project within the partnership is the relationship that you're building, maintaining, developing, expanding, the human side of it all, as anybody who works in international business would tell you as well. The successful partnerships often engage organizations and communities beyond the university. They don't just stay in the academic realm. They have the capacity to deal with difficulties. They don't sweep them under the rug. They don't ignore them. They don't pretend they're not happening. They're fully ready to deal with disagreements and challenges, etc. And above all, the bottom bullet, successful partnerships operate through genuine dialogue, commitment, mutuality, and equity. I could say a lot more about that. We'll save it for the discussion. Now, I want to add that the last 3 years have boosted partnerships in a way that we did not, those of us who work in this field, did not anticipate. When the pandemic hit back in 2020, and I had just come back from a partnership development program in Palestine and the West Bank, and literally the next week we were locked down. But when it hit in 2020, we all expected that this would limit partnerships. But as early as May 2020 at IIE held an online webinar, 400 plus institutions were attending the webinar, and we threw out the question, what's happening with your partnerships? Are they becoming less active, more active, about the same? Over half said they had become more active during the pandemic. They were responding to partner needs in new ways and supporting stranded students, sending medical supplies back and forth. Something was going on that didn't go on when institutions were depending on travel to have for their interactions. So the last 3 years have led many of us to question what we have taken for granted for partnerships and for international ed more generally. And this all builds on what has been for 15 years a really growing and much needed critique of lopsided partnerships. But over the last 3 years, we have seen that strong partnerships can rise to the challenges posed by a pandemic. And being locked down both demanded and gave more time to communicate. If you're not traveling, you actually can virtually communicate more than you would if you're saving all your conversations for when you are face to face. We became acutely aware of the global nature of COVID and of all of the challenges that face us today, and that we really must stay in touch with each other. Partnerships dramatically increased their use of online collaboration. This increased use of online collaboration did something that else that we hadn't anticipated. It flattened resource differentials between partners. And this, I first became aware of this through writings from the Global South, from Chassi in South Africa, for example, and Finardi and Guimarães in Brazil, where they were saying now that they were interacting with their international partners primarily online, they felt it was more democratic. They felt their voices were counting the same as the others, because travel, the institution that had the most money to travel was no longer sort of the dominant partner, and that there really was a hope here for how to undo some of the lopsidedness of so many partnerships in the past. It also became clear that by going online, this enabled more faculty, more staff, and more students to engage with partners than if we were dependent on travel alone. Now that we're able to travel again, what's so interesting is that many of the faculty and students who first got to meet partners virtually are now traveling to them. So it has not inhibited travel or displaced it so much as it expanded who realize the audience for this kind of interaction. And also the final bullet here, the move toward justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion and decolonization has accompanied the pandemic and been part of the very active mix of the last 3 years. All of that has really caused us to look at partnerships with the Jedi lens and the decolonial lens, and revealed the skewed distribution of where we have partnerships with, in what nations, with what kinds of institutions, with what academic disciplines, what students, and to realize that this is very skewed distribution, and that only a very elite few are really getting to participate, and yet everyone could benefit from this. So in short, I think this is my last slide, George. In short, the last 3 years have made clear that international partnerships should be seen as more than physical mobility. They can withstand time and turmoil if they are well constructed and supported. They are key to the collaboratively built knowledge that we need for this century. They should be expanded to include more students at more higher education institutions in more nations. They come in many more forms than we have historically been using. They're possible even for HEIs with few financial resources, as long as you have internet working at least some of the time, part of the day, and cell phones, you can do it. They are witnessing a moment of great expansion, reformulation, and creativity right now. And they are leading us to measure institutional impact, not only in terms of what benefits our own institutions, and that's the traditional way of measuring partnerships. What does my institution get out of it? But the pandemic put us all in the same boat. And so more and more partnerships are being reconceived. What do we get out of this together? How do we all move forward together? I think these are all good things. And I think that's it. Okay, so that's my 8 minutes worth.
I think you're muted, George.
I just shared the secrets of the universe too. No, thank you so much, Susan. what I recognize in my own university is that we have the decolonization project built into our strategic plan. And boy, has it been insightful and interesting on what's happening, and being able to apply it to the international partnerships is a really interesting notion that needs to be catered to. I think I also took from your presentation that, especially for our audience who is here today, who are at different levels in the international initiatives on their campus, agency resides in each of us to be the one who highlights an unbalanced partnership or something that has been signed and is now needs to be dusted off. We don't have to wait for the SIO or the somebody else or one of our leaders. If we recognize it in whatever our capacity is, we have really the responsibility in some ways to be the one to bring attention to it. And then we could become champions for that project. And it's really an exciting endeavor. So thank you so much. I want to move forward now. To Nancy. Really excited for Nancy's presentation. She's with Gazelle International. And Nancy, please, I'll pass the baton to you.
Excellent. Well, thank you, George. And what a setup, Susan. It's perfect. Flattening and going virtual. My cup of tea. So let me share the screen, make sure that I have the right, set this up for the right, because I usually do it a slightly different way. So here's hoping that it will work. All right, so I'm going to go to, okay, so is everyone seeing G1, GI6 evaluating sustainability? We're good? Great.
I think we are seeing your, you want to hit, it says swap displays at the top. That will be better for you. We're seeing your presentation mode. There you go.
No. Oh, it's funny because now I'm on the opposite. All right. We'll go with it. All right. So Nancy Ruther, and thank you so much for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here with everyone. And excuse me if I start speaking too fast for those for whom English may not be the first language. But hopefully we will catch up in the questions and answers. So Gazelle International is an odd name. The idea came from a conference that I was running at Yale on African higher education and development. And the African participants, provost and international leaders were talking about being dinosaurs and you can't change higher education. And I had made sure to invite a couple of Latin American international education types just to balance, just in case we did get into that kind of echo chamber effect. And one of them just said, well, of course, higher ed is a group of dinosaurs. You have to find the gazelle who's ready to break out and lead. So I said, if I ever start a nonprofit, that's the name. So I'm looking for gazelles to work with in our higher education partners. And again, at Yale, I saw the power of technology to create efficiencies even at Yale. There's never enough money. There are always just bigger cats looking for more money. So especially in languages, we were able to use technology to reach more students than we could have with our regular classes and those kinds of things. We did some consortium work with language and technology that was really powerful. We even did some political science classes were connected electronically after the Rwanda genocide. So I had some experience with the power of the virtual exchanges to really enhance learning and bring faculty together in really creative, interesting ways. And the other thing that I did was to work with community colleges and the K-16 network as part of our federal grant outreach requirements. And I fell in love with community colleges, frankly. So I did end up creating Gazelle International as a nonprofit 6 years ago when I retired from Yale. And on the grounds that every student deserves a place at that international higher education table, not just the Yales and the Wesleyans and University of Washington places. And that international virtual exchange can transform real lives in very deep ways. And so that's what I committed Gazelle International to do. So I never quite assume that people know what it is. So collaborative international virtual exchange means that we're connecting in our work is connecting two classrooms in different countries where the teachers create a third learning space, like Claire Kromsch, I think, called it the third learning space, where the two teachers or more teachers and the students collaborate in creating a final learning product that meets the goals of both classes in the two countries. It's a good trick. Of course, we do it with technology, and that final cross-national team project, not Alabama and Mexico creating the best robot, but Alabama and Mexico working together to create 5 teams worth of best robots per team. So it's not a competition, it's not a pitch, it's collaborating to produce something across the cultures and across the subject matters. Okay, so we call it CLIC, Collaborative Learning for International Capabilities and Knowledge. That's our version of virtual exchange. There are many, especially since COVID. And so again, the criteria that we use is it's project-based intercultural team learning. That's where you really get the cross-cultural impact. And connecting the classrooms for credit courses, not music club, working with Viennese orchestras or something. This is for credit. And teacher-led, so that you could provide access to any student who can enroll in the course on your campus. So access and the efficiency of being able to reach any student who's already on your campus with the technology you already have on your campus. And now post-COVID, teachers increasingly, I'd say pre-COVID, maybe 20 or 25% of teachers were willing to think about this and use technology. I think it's more like 80% now would be willing to at least consider this, right? So that's a huge difference. And so what we do is it ends up so that you have teachers and the campus partners both in kind of a parallel, hopefully virtuous cycle, not vicious cycle. But so we work with the teachers. So the campus commits the teachers to a cohort. We find partners for them. And we put together a cohort of, say, 5 teachers on each side. We go through a set of workshops where they, to Susan's point about partner compatibility, you need to have professional and personal compatibility for the teachers. So we focus on that, do the matching within the cohort, and then train them as partners to develop this shared learning space and create design the final projects that the students will complete to encapsulate those goals that they have for their shared activities. Then, of course, the teachers run the projects, usually in the next semester. We continue coaching. It's a big lift for these high impact practices. Collaborative teaching is different than just group work in class. Anyway, a little coaching and support to get them over the bumps as they come up. And we have built assessment, pre and post assessment into each project. So that's where so there's institutional planning and commitment that ideally between the partners, but at least the 2 universities or multiple universities can just be the observers of their faculty and then create more enduring partnerships. So it can start with partner campuses, or it can start with individual teachers building up to partner campuses. And so those are the cycles, hopefully scaling up from the initial few teachers to move more broadly into the curriculum. So it fits, I see it fitting as a hinge between our, as Susan said, the travel strategies, bringing people in, sending people out, joint research, whatever it is, and giving more breadth, more depth to the curriculum internationalization. That was always kind of the boring thing for teachers. If you're not already interested in African history, you don't want to add Africa or some other part of the world to your US history course. You just don't. But if you have the opportunity as a US history teacher to connect with, I don't know, Germans or French or someone who have all these wonderful memorials and you're part of our history too, then maybe comparing US history and French history gets more interesting. And you've got a collaborator you would like to work with. So international virtual exchange brings this cross-national learning capacity in not just students collaborating, but faculty are collaborating. And face it, it's faculty, teaching is a pretty solo job. So, and I think it's important. So the notion that we're focused on the faculty as the anchor in the partnership, it amplifies rather than disrupting the curriculum. It's kind of, one teacher said it added a new lens on his old practices because he was working with someone else who he was a biology teacher, I think, working with a history teacher. So the history of biology progress, not just the science. And both sides learned a lot. So, and I think Susan made the point that it's a false choice between mobility and virtual exchange. It's a continuum now. Hybrid, post-COVID. I think it was a false choice pre-COVID. So I want to share a case study of sorts with the assessment work that we've done on these teacher campus partnerships. We've built it in from the very beginning, both the counting pieces part, the outputs, how many programs, how many click projects, how many campuses, how many teachers, how many students, the typical output. But we also realized early on, if we were going to use this teacher partnership as a way to build larger campus partnerships, we needed to have good assessment on the results, the learning results for the students, the faculty professional development results, and the program results. So that's what we've tried to do. So I want to give you, and I gave George a journal article that we were lucky enough to have enough data and enough talent and a very good editor to get into the Journal of Virtual Exchange. But it provides a lot more detail on how we've been doing this. So I wanted to give you my takeaways before I jump into a few examples from our assessment results on the power of this kind of faculty-based partnership to lead larger partnerships. So faculty agency through these teaching partnerships can really provide a powerful support for the larger international education program. The teachers say that. They wouldn't think about working on their international program on their campus before. Now they're looking for ways. Harnessing the full power of both faculty creativity and your curriculum with this virtual exchange is the most cost-effective way I can imagine to get for your different goals of quality in your curriculum, access, and equity. It's amazing. And then the common goals that get of our assessment. So we've created common goals for all three levels: student, faculty, programmer, campus. But they're fine-tuned to each group, kind of made more concrete, like the Russian doll, right? Strategic, and then down to what the faculty need to do to achieve those goals, to what the students need to achieve those goals. And so it's a layered approach to the assessment. Okay, so first I want to show you the simple output indicators that most of these virtual exchange programs around the world, which are proliferating. So I used our own annual report for the output metrics. And you see the COVID flatten out the growth. But so this is typically what you measure in a virtual exchange. You know, how many teachers, how many campuses, how many students, how many click projects. Ideally, you will also know when they go beyond the first click project, a one and done, into repeating the same project after they know how to do it, keep going with the same teacher. Then whatever investment there was in developing the course, you're expanding the number of students reached with the initial investment. Okay, so, but those are your simple output indicators. Or you can do it visually, because you're looking at growing this ecosystem of virtual exchange partners. So keep track of it, make it pretty, put it on a map, right? Which is actually pretty compelling. I find most senior leadership like pictures. They like to kind of, oh, what is that? Let me see. The table, yeah, but pretty things. We're all good monkeys at heart, I think. So we have this, I want to go into we have had one anchor client in a New England community college system since our founding 6 years ago. And so the first thing we did with them was to figure out what the strategic level view would be across the 12 campus system. I know we're tiny states here. So the idea was creating globally ready graduates who will thrive in an interconnected high-tech world and workforce with these wonderful outcomes, right? Fitness, you may not recognize, that's a new addition to our list. It's it's not developing expertise in technologies, but the ability to use it for the purpose you have. Are you as fit enough to be a player on the field, to be a coach, or a fan in the stands? That's kind of the idea. And then the 21st century skill sets and working in international teams, along with solid knowledge of the core field in the curriculum. So we agreed on those early on, not all of those. We had 3 to start and have kind of expanded or just shifted what we called them. I said we fine-tuned it down to value for students and value for faculty. So what were the broad goals for students and faculty? And so those are the 3 that we boiled it down to: intercultural maturity and awareness, confidence in finding success in the global workforce. First, knowing what we mean by that, but confidence that you could work in that much larger world. And the teachers find these 3 very useful. They can see how their field fits, how they can teach to that. And in some ways, they're already doing it with other strategic goals on their campus. The value for faculty was murkier, but we created, again, post-project, after they run the click project. And these are, again, the confidence and skills to support their students in these 21st century skills. High impact practices is what most campuses call it. And co-teaching, many people see co-teaching as a really valuable professional career enhancing skill, which kind of surprised me, but okay. And then to a person, I mean, our client was interested in, will they do more for the international program? To a teacher, they said yes, they would like to, because they find it so compelling for their students. And again, we're working with community colleges and their cousins around the world. So community colleges tend to be a desert for international resources or any expectation of international experience. So those were what we were trying to assess. Let me give you, so we had both survey, pre and post surveys with the students. And in the community colleges, workforce readiness is really a key goal. So this particular, we used the responses in the first 3 years to this question on workforce confidence to really adjust our training and materials, because I mean, so the question was, learning to collaborate cross-culturally will prepare me for the global workforce. That was year one. The top 2 bars are year one. And pre-project, the students were all excited. Yes, everybody was on the positive side. At the end of the project, it shifted negative. They did a bad job. I didn't learn much. Well, some. There was still some positive, but this is not what you want to see in the results of your first outing. So what do we do? What really happened? So there are open-ended questions. So we talked to the faculty. Turns out they were using pretty high-flying rhetoric that the students understood. I'm going to be able to, instead of going to the local manufacturer, I'm going to go work for the big Sikorsky helicopter plant. I'm going to go to an international company now, automatically as a result of this. So we tamped down the rhetoric. We changed the question. It was early on, so we now have 6 datas with a better question, like position me to succeed in the global workforce, not get me a job. So this has been understood better by the students. And
Nancy, I do need to jump in. In the interest of time, I only have about another minute or so. Are there any more? Because this is compelling.
Okay, so that's what we did on that one. The open-ended questions, the interesting thing about the qualitative responses is the same things that are their biggest challenge: cross-cultural and cross-language communication, technology, time zones, any project management is hard. Is that the results were, we did it despite the challenges. We're so proud of ourselves. Improved communication, liking working with the groups, learning more, right? So it's just classic. What's hard makes us stronger, and they loved it. And then finally, the teachers who are participating, I've said these things already, and the percentages are pretty impressive. But basically you get certificates and happy teachers, happy students, happy teachers. And there are some resources left that I will leave with you to look at samples that you might want to see. Okay, look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Nancy. I was able to distribute the PDF through the chat feature, so everybody should have access to download that if you would like. And really, I think such an important lesson there is, the not being discouraged, getting that initial feedback. That assessment helped you understand what were the expectations that they had versus what was being delivered, so they could be realigned. So thank you for that content. Next, we're going to hear from Yaz with Verify Ed. Thank you so much. May I pass the baton to you?
You may. Thank you, George. And a lovely place to hand over again, Nancy. Nicely done with the certificates as your last slide. My name's Gazelle Hakim. I'm co-founder and co-CEO of Verify Ed. It's a pleasure to be here and to be supporting the program. I believe Tony and I had a conversation before it was founded, and actually we've been a partner from the very beginning, or very close to it at least. And I'm just going to share my screen and take you through some of the parts that have got us to here and share some of my understandings. I just wanted to share a little bit. There are a couple of things that I listened to. Thank you so much for all the compelling information about spreading yourselves too thin and not focusing. There's a really good piece called The Peanut Butter Manifesto by Brad Garlinghouse, when he was at Yahoo, talking about spreading yourself too thin and not being able to make any actual distance or progress. But what I wanted to be able to do now is just take you through some of my experiences and some of the understandings and learnings I've had, given quite a, well, I'd like to say quite a unique pathway. So my name is Yaz. I never left university until I was about 34, just really enjoyed studying, kept studying until I started teaching, taught until I became part of senior management at Winchester University in the UK. I was privileged to be a handful of students that went on a semester exchange when I was at Chichester University, very much faculty to faculty interaction and exchange. Set up the first semester exchange at Winchester when I was teaching sports psychology. That again gave me the knowledge of the impact it could be having for students beyond as well. But it was quite exclusive. It was quite a handful of people. So the things that Nancy was saying about online creating a more level playing field feel very positive. Also been part of other research projects, etc., but I thought people might want a little bit of background. So started in academia and then joined edtech companies in Utah, London, and founded Verify Ed 3.5 years ago. And what I thought I could bring in terms of experience, as a sports psychologist, you need to know your competencies and not go outside them. So you know when to refer to experts. Thank you very much to the fellow panelists who are very esteemed and knowledgeable in international education. But I do know about academic partnerships. I was privileged to set some up at Winchester, both international and with edtech companies. And there were some certain principles that I wanted to be able to share today briefly with you all that seem to have been, there's some case studies or stories that I'll share around where it's worked and where it hasn't worked. The thing that I've learned in starting my own company is that I've been exposed to a startup ecosystem that has made me reflect on a lot of the cultural traditions and historical traditions that I was exposed to in higher education institution for so long, and the ways that we approached partnership development activities, etc. I'm sure most of you will have heard of Simon Sinek by now, but when I first started the company, his was one of the first books that I read, and it was a revelation to think about why we were actually doing things. I think at Winchester, I experienced a lot of initiatives getting started, partnerships being started, because other universities had done something in the space and we simply followed suit. Was not always clear why we were making certain partnerships. And that can lead you to very serendipitous, wonderful things, but it can also lead to quite painful failures. One example is a partnership that we set up with a company where it was purchased for all the wrong reasons. It was an idea around, this will save us time, this will make it better for the experience of the students, this will help everything be a far better experience. Phenomenal amount of money was spent, and 16 people over 3 years used the platform. It didn't plug into our hardware, it wasn't piloted in the way that you'd want it to do, the scaling of it was awful, and the usability of the platform was took away a lot of the goodwill that we know exists in institutions. But we didn't have a very clear why to inspire everyone as to why we wanted to use it, and we didn't think about how we structured the partnership, which I think is really essential. And I just wanted to share from Verify Ed's perspective, our why, it has to inspire. So from my perspective, my father was Sudanese, my mother was Cornish, very different backgrounds, but I'm aware, having lived both in Sudan and in England, that there are voracious and capable learners all over the world, and our platform is here to identify and help coach and promote, champion those individual learners around the world, irrespective of location and background. And we do that through blockchain-backed digital credentials and certificates that not only have a credential attached to them, but they map the skills. They have the granular data behind it that actually means that we can see people's passions and distinctions. So when 1,000 students graduate from a course, we're able to identify which ones have a specific passion or a specific skill that an employer or someone is looking for that can help them. And it means that in a global workforce where more people are able to access opportunities from remote locations, that we actually find ourselves in a phenomenal opportunity. So we start with why. We need to be inspired by the why, and I think for yourselves, you'll have whys why you've started certain partnerships. I'm up for people sharing some of those in chat if that's an easier way for you to do it. But I am going to ask everyone to think about a partnership that they've been connected to in their institutions and write down just one metric for success that they saw as that partnership delivering, just as a way to interact, share with other people on the call, and to be able to start to pick apart some of those metrics. Because one of the reasons that the project I mentioned earlier failed were the metrics were very much, it's going to help. It wasn't specified through a pilot, we are going to see X, Y, and Z improved. This is going to lead to this partnership scaling. Those things were not established in a very well articulated or concise way. So for instance, we've got metrics of success that we've got with some of the universities that we're partnered with around the world. These can include specifically the number of issued credentials, the student feedback. The skills developed across courses, so course providers actually realizing they don't understand the skills or the knowledges that are being developed and mastered across the courses, the number of credentials shared to social or professional networks, how much that impacts the profile of the courses online and the network effects of those, the cost and time savings of automations. These are all really specific metrics of success. And I appreciate you'll have more internationally focused metrics, but please do be sharing those across your networks to benefit from each other. If you have metrics for success, the evaluation against them becomes really simple. How many were actually issued? How many people did actually enjoy using it? Was it, a 9 or 10 rating on the Net Promoter Score, which says people are going to advocate the use of the platform elsewhere? It's solving a problem. This all became much easier. And I think there's a number of things here that I think when we were talking at the beginning and Susan was saying around the paper being signed, the dormant metrics, there are lots of MOUs that can be signed, but if you don't have a clear why, a clear set of metrics of what's going to be done and a clear plan of action to be able to execute and then evaluate against it, it means that a lot of those partnerships are just on paper. Not ironically, unfortunately, it often comes with effort. And one of the questions that really piqued my interest was around the decentralized, centralized partnerships, and lots of them being decentralized from the question. Being able to actually create standardization and a central knowledge of what's happening, like Nancy showed, I think is a really good way of being able to then have a sharing of practice. We did that with learning and teaching at Winchester, where we had a small pot of funding. We split it into even smaller pots. And then we saw lots of people do small projects at a very small level. And then we gave bigger amounts of funding to the projects that delivered, that showed that traction, showed the progress and move forward. And then beyond that, being able to reflect and iterate. So sometimes a partnership wasn't right and you needed to cancel it. And we didn't in the first 6 months of one partnership that I think should have been. Just say, this isn't working, the values aren't right, the structure isn't right, we're on very different wavelengths of what's going to be achieved, it's lopsided in terms of the benefits. These things I think we need to be much better at as institutions in terms of saying, actually, this partnership's not serving and we need to stop, pause, reflect and restructure. Having set up my own startup, these are still painful learnings that I'm doing as well, but we are enjoying sharing some of these findings and learnings back with universities as we continue partnering with them. Thank you very much for listening. I am going to stop sharing there and leave some time for Q&A. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Yes, that was very interesting, relevant, and important to have those additional perspectives. I'll ask my colleague, Rosa, if there's time for a question or two that she may want to facilitate. We're right here at the end, though. I appreciate Rosa put all of the LinkedIn profiles of our panelists, so you could feel free to make some connections. But Rosa, was there anything more?
I have a question, just to choose one short question that we could maybe, and maybe Susan can answer in a short way. It refers to, what do you see as advantages of centralized versus decentralized partnerships? And how does this impact sustainability? Sure,
I'm happy to take that up. I think that wise institutions will have both types, that each, there are pros and cons to each of them. It's not that one way is the only way. It's absolutely true, as Nancy said, that if faculty aren't engaged, the partnership is not going to work. But it's also true that if there is not framing and connection to the why of the institution and the resources of the institution, et cetera, that the partnership will also probably fall apart when that single faculty member is no longer interested. And so I always like when partnerships find that middle ground, the top down and the bottom up. Neither one works is the only way to go, but they work best when they could meet in the middle. So that's my quick answer to it. But I think there can be 1,000 points of light, and that's how academia has operated for a long, long time, and that has spurred a lot of creative thinking and new ideas. But it's also, as we know, has led to a lot of elitism and exclusivity in higher ed it requires a broader, more institutional approach to think about and to facilitate. At the same time, I also know that if a chancellor or president were simply to say, we're going to partner with Brazil, that's going to go absolutely nowhere. In fact, most faculty will immediately say, I'll have nothing to do with Brazil, thank you. And just because that's how I was in the classroom for 40 years, that's how we as faculty see ourselves. So it's what you want to do is create an atmosphere where I think what Yas said, where faculty recognize that there's more to the partnership than their particular subject matter or their particular collaboration with one individual, that they need expertise from outside. At the same time, the administrative level recognizes that these initiatives that they should be proclaiming must come from a lot of group discussion about what the institution, what its faculty, what its students, what its surrounding community, if it's a public institution, public serving institution, how that all can fit together to identify certain foci that are best to pursue. As for example, University of Illinois at one point knew it wanted to do more in Africa because that's part of the world they weren't doing what they thought was enough. And what they did, they did a survey of all of the research collaborations that the University of Illinois faculty were engaged in, identified particular countries where there were more clusters of collaborations, talked to their social science and language faculty. Can we support faculty in having the sufficient cultural framing to be able to work in these areas? And explored partnerships with potential universities there, and this was a 2-year process before settling on anything, in which both sides were working together to find what would work. That said, my final part is, I think it's great for institutions to have opportunities for faculty to try things on, small seed grants, etc. I think it's also great for universities to say, after all of the discussions I've talked about, we will give special support to certain key areas that certain key partners where we are really going to develop something that lasts for a long, long time. Indiana University's biggest partnership is with Moi University in Western Kenya. It's been going on since 2 faculty started it in 1989. And it now every single school or college at IU is involved, as well as some at Purdue and other institutions as well. So this one size does not fit all.
That's really interesting, Susan. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our panelists today and to all attendees to the webinar. And we do think this has been a really useful webinar, and please feel free to contact us about the questions, and we'll have the webinar posted in the Gateway Facebook. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Have a great week.
Thank
And
you,
thank
everyone.
you, panelists.
Bye.